Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/Romanian_roulette. My uncle encountered a thing on my granddad's ranch. I would like to note that this is my uncle's story, not mine. I will also be writing this through my uncle's perspective when the event occurred. Thanks, OP. I guess the whole event took place in the summer of '75. I was about 13. For the story to make sense, I'll start with context. My mother divorced my dad due to his issues with alcoholism, and quickly got custody over me and my 5 siblings. My dad was struggling greatly, so he made what was most likely the best decision, to move to a remote log cabin in Montana. He also had pretty serious mental problems. Because of his problems and the severity of them, my mom decided to never really let us stay at his cabin. She claims that she made a good decision, but I really feel like she accidentally made things worse, just isn't brave enough to own up to it. Anyway, my mother finally decided to let me fly up to my dad's cabin for a week, mostly because she felt like he needed someone in his life. Someone of his own flesh and blood to just be there for him. I wasn't very pleased with the decision at first, but my mother just told me to suck it up, so I did. The first day I arrived, my dad picked me up in his Ford 67 and we drove off. From the start, I could immediately tell that he was really bad off. He was very unkempt, he smelled like sweat and cheap deodorant, and he just gave off the vibe that he had practically hit rock bottom in life. But despite all that, I could tell he was happy to see me. For the rest of the day, we just took it easy, I helped him with some housework, and just got to know each other. Everything was calm as could be until the sun set. That night, as I tucked myself into bed, I heard a sound. It sounded like something scratching against the window, and I also remember a faint deep, guttural sound. It honestly scared the shit out of me. But I was never a brave kid, so I just pretended it wasn't there and fell asleep after a while. The next morning, I decided to tell my dad about what I heard, to which he replied, it was probably just some coyote or puma. I was pretty sure it wasn't a puma or coyote, but I went with it anyway. The next night, I heard the exact same thing I heard the night before, just louder. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but deep down, I knew there was no way that the noise was from an animal, regardless of what it was. I begged my dad to let me sleep somewhere else, but he didn't seem to take me seriously. I guess he just thought I was joking or something. With my nerves practically screaming in fear, I tried to suck it up and sleep that night. But of course, it was back, and louder than ever. That's when I made the bold decision to look outside the window and hopefully, see that my concerns were over nothing. What I saw instead stuck with me permanently. I saw some humanoid creature on hands and knees, scratching at my window. Its body was thin and very lanky, and resembled a human with white skin aside from its head. Its head was the bloody skull of a buck. We even made eye-to-socket contact. I screamed and shut my eyes. I only opened them once I heard my dad running in from his room. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. Thankfully, my dad started to believe me from this point on. It's been about 40 years since the incident, and I still remember all of it like a nightmare you can never forget. My dad passed away 7 years later, apparently from a breaking and entering gone wrong. I don't think I want to know what they meant by gone wrong. Thankfully, my dad is in a better place now, and I just hope that one day, I'll forget what happened and I'll be at peace too. Second story. This story was shared by you/Groovy97. I saw something in the woods of Nova Scotia, Canada. I need to know what it was. This is a story I haven't really told anyone. Geez, if it weren't for my best friend being present when it happened, I probably would have gaslit myself into believing it was a nightmare or I was just going plain nuts. It's one of those memories that, no matter how much time goes by, you never forget, the details don't get muddy for even a moment. It was 2012, my freshman year of high school. I was 15 years old and had been in the company of my best friend that night, let's call her Marie. We lived in a fairly small town on the eastern coast of Canada, Nova Scotia to be exact. It was an old mining community sat in the middle of the woods, to paint a picture for you. There wasn't really much to do, our economy had tanked many moons before the rest of the country, so outside of hard drugs or crime all you really had to do was walk around. Marie and I just so happened to have made walking a bit of a natural pastime. We'd properly mapped out that entire town and its surrounding hills and forests in rain, shine, sleet or snow. We'd seen everything our little community had to offer, from its vast range of wildlife to its colorful selection of junkies. Please, keep these tidbits in mind before you tell me what we saw was an animal or a human. It was an autumn night, with nothing more for two high school girls to do and homework not being something we specialized in. We decided to go on one of our many town walks. This night in particular had us go a little off the beaten trail. You see, typically we'd have stuck to the main roads, probably ended up at a Tim Hortons before calling it a night and heading back home, but not tonight. Tonight we decided to walk by the food bank. You might be wondering what the draw of an old food bank is. You see, it wasn't just a food bank. Back when we were still a mining town, our food bank was a train station. Trains would come by and pick up coal that was freshly dug from the coal mines and take it all across the country. The old train yard was still there, its now rust-covered cars acting as mock tombs to a much more prosperous era gone by. We'd frequented the train yard with our friends in the past, climbing the cars, sneaking inside among other things that could have gotten kids hurt, so it wasn't a new place to us at all, and we thought that since it was at the tree line, tucked away in a quiet enough part of town that we could freely walk and chat without the concern of traffic or the like. Sidewalks weren't very frequent on that side of town. The sun had already set as we made our way down the long stretch of road, that October chill grasping at our small frames like glue, while the all too familiar autumn smell of still dying plant life had permeated the air. We were talking to each other about what teenage girls typically babble about: boys, Facebook, you know, real important stuff. We had been so caught up in our conversation of the most dire importance that by the time we had made it to the fence that lined the train yard, it genuinely took us a moment to notice the noise. It was a very clear scream. We stopped dead in our tracks and began to stare at each other, not so much out of fear but bewilderment. It didn't quite sound like an animal, but it definitely didn't sound human either. I've gotten up close and personal with enough cougars, wolves, and toddlers to know that this screaming we were hearing was caught somewhere in between man and beast. We stood there, glaring into each other's eyes for a few more seconds before finally turning our attention towards the sound. It was dark, mind you, not pitch black, as there were some street lights around, though few and far between, but we couldn't see anything. To us from where we were standing it was just an old train station turned food bank, a rusted-out fence and a couple of unused and falling-apart train cars. The screams didn't subside as we were now staring into the foreground of what became a series of mental photographs of the area. It was then I realized that just up ahead, the third and final train car sat partially covered from our viewpoint by a few bushes. I had turned my head to Marie, a mischievous grin dawning my face like a cowl. "Last one to the train car has to buy the French vanillas," I exclaimed before quickly jogging along the side of the fence toward the final car. I heard Marie call out, "Hey! Wait up," as my feet clearly were acting before my brain. I mean, gosh, this could have been some wild animal or really anything, and I was just running into blind. I'm not particularly a brave person, and I'm honestly not sure why I did this or anything else that happens from here on out. I rounded the fence, the screaming getting louder and louder as I strode closer and closer. My heart began to race with both anxiety and sheer excitement. I wasn't sure what I was even getting myself into or what I was expecting to see at all. Needless to say, about a second later the ever-increasing beating from my chest had come to a standstill as my heart had made itself a new home in my throat. I stopped so quickly Marie had slammed right into the back of me, but I was so frozen in fear at what I was now looking at that I barely even budged. the screaming still echoing off of the forest so loudly I could barely hear the faint whisper of an "oh my God" escape Marie's lips. No more than about 20 feet away from us, crouched just under the train car, was a pale, hairless and naked person. It was just sitting there under the front of the car, screaming into the darkness of the autumn night. Each time it screamed its arms would leer forward from under the car, they extended out to an unnatural length almost like 2 tree branches. We both stood there, frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. What were they doing? Were they hurt? On drugs? A million questions had begun to race through my head, and one look at Marie's face had told me the same questions were racking her mind as well. We must have stood there just watching in complete awe for what felt like 5 minutes, but realistically it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, maybe a minute at the most. That's when, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take a few steps closer. I took my first shaky step towards it. I felt Marie's hand grasp my arm as if to say, "Don't," but it was clear that her fear outweighed her functionality as I easily broke from her grip just by continuing forward. I had closed about 5 or so feet of distance before stopping. I continued to stare at it from my position for another moment before clearing my throat and stammering the words, "Hey, are you okay?" The second I said those words, any thought of this being a person in need of help had flown out the window and dissipated in the cool nighttime air. Almost as if someone had hit stop on a recording, the screaming it had been happy to emit had ceased, and then it was staring at us. You need to understand, it didn't seem to even move its head. It was just 1 second staring forward into the night and the next right back toward us. A faint growl began to seep into the area now from where it was positioned as I took in the details of its face, in which I had become sure it wasn't human. It had a mouth that seemed to take up the width of most of its face, like a thin crack in a slab of concrete. Its eyes were small but almost glowed in through the darkness with the most piercing yellow I have ever seen. After it had taken its time to mimic our staring back at us, its crack-like mouth had almost cartoonishly curled into a smiling man-like grin, its lips parting to reveal its long, jagged and razor-like teeth. The beast and I continued locked into this war of attrition, though it was admittedly clearly more confident in being the dominant one in the exchange of looks. It broke the stare down after another moment, bringing its long, twiggy arms up from under the train car. It wrapped its fingers around the lip of the car and at a near breakneck speed kicked itself out from under the train car with a swing, almost like a chimpanzee leaping from one tree branch to another before landing and planting itself on the ground in a pose akin to that of a frog. It continued to its gaze, which now had begun to feel as though I was being sized up. My whole body had been shaking at what was akin to Mach 5. I tried to avert my eyes, look anywhere else, as it felt like any moment I would pass out in sheer terror, but I was drawn in. It felt almost like it had me in some sort of trance. I watched as it slowly began to stand, unfurling itself from the position it was in. It just seemed to get taller and taller until what I was looking at was at its full stance. Its entire body, a pasty gray. Its arms had drooped down well past its knees and its legs hooked in the back near the calf, almost like a goat. The words "I'm not religious in the slightest," though I was raised Catholic in my younger years, and the only words I could think to muster were, "Hail Mary, full of grace," as I began to pray and stared down what I was sure was my end. The creature then leered itself forward, throwing its arms back as its jaw unhinged itself from its skull and dropped down to about its collarbones as it let out one final shriek, the noise embedding itself in my brain and making sure not to ever leave, to forever haunt my nightmares along with the image. I closed my eyes so tight my head began to hurt. I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks with my lips pierced close so tightly that not even a breath could escape them, and then nothing. Silence. Deafening silence. Was it over? That quickly? Was I dead? I slowly opened one eye, peeking out. I saw it, a final look. It had retaken its crouching position, giving us its final glance as well before it turned its back to us. An encounter that had felt like it lasted hours had then swiftly ended in that of a few mere seconds as the creature leapt from its position to the tree line, and then one final leap into the woods. Just like that, it had vanished. I had almost all but forgotten Marie was there until the softness of her voice had brought me back to earth with a "Kenzie. What the fuck was?" I turned to her, her skin had gone sheet white and her eyes were red with tears. My legs had finally given out from the sheer exhaustion of it all as I had fallen to my knees, Marie quickly running over and catching me in an embrace as we silently wept. I'm not sure too much of what happened after that, it's all a blur really. I told some people at first, but they were quick to laugh me off as a liar or that I was simply being over-imaginative, with Marie moving away about a year later and my only witness having gone, that didn't help my credibility. It's been 10 years since then, I no longer live in Nova Scotia and actually live in the same town as my best Marie again. We still bring this up to each other every now and again but refrain from telling most anyone else out of fear of being labeled crazy. My last words I'd like to say are pretty blunt. If you live in Nova Scotia, Canada, please be careful. There is something living in the woods and it is not human. Third story. This story was shared by you/Fisherman Tales. The Man in the Woods. The cabin was small and hidden deep within the woods, far from any road. It had a wood shingle exterior, one door, one curtained window, and a metal stovepipe sticking out from the roof. Along the side was a rack of logs and a stump with an axe stuck in it. On the other side was a line for hanging clothes. Think it's abandoned? I whispered. Justin shook his head. Nature ain't taken it yet. What do you mean? You ain't ever noticed that when people leave a place, nature moves in? All those plants and green that show up. Oh, yeah. Like the old church. Just like that. And it don't take long, neither. Why does nature wait for people to leave? It don't wait, Cole. Nature's always trying to take over, but people won't let it. It's like a war, or an invasion, one that never ends. Nature was here first, though. So. That means we're the invaders. We ain't been given a choice. Well, we could at least be nicer. Justin was quiet for a moment, then said, let's get a closer look at that house. We crept through crunching leaves, stopping every few steps to listen, then continued forward until we reached the side of the house. What if they have a gun? I asked. Everyone has a gun out here. Yeah, but what if they use it on us? We're just kids. They ain't gonna shoot a couple of kids. People have killed kids before. You worry too much. If they pull a gun on us, we'll run. Ain't nobody faster than us. We ain't faster than bullets. Justin peeked around to the front of the cabin and said, I'm gonna try the door. Wait. Keep an eye out. Before I could say no, Justin rounded the corner and was at the door. I watched the surrounding woods for movement. With each passing second, I felt as if the homeowner was coming closer, but I was too anxious to tell if nothing was moving or if everything was. It was as if some invisible force were charging toward us. Cole, Justin whispered, startling me. He was peeking around the corner, waving me over. It's unlocked. I hurried to him, and we stepped through the open door into a small, tidy space. There was a neatly made twin-sized bed, and a deerskin rug spread across the wooden floor. On the right side of the room was a wood stove with a pot on top, with a shelf above it that held various jarret herbs and spices. On the left of the room was a bookshelf holding about a dozen books and next to that a wooden chest. Wow, I said. This is awesome. Let's see what's in that chest, Justin said, and knelt and opened it. He rummaged through, pulling out various clothes until it was empty. Nothing good. Check out these books, I said. Justin closed the chest then looked over my shoulder as I pulled out books on gardening, hunting, bushcraft, and taxidermy. What's this one? Justin said, reaching past to grab a book with a blank leather cover. Is it a Bible? It's my journal, a deep voice announced from behind us, startling us against the bookshelf, causing several books to get knocked over onto the floor. The man was tall and looked to be in his mid-40s. He was clean-shaven and didn't look much like the sort of person you'd expect to find living hidden in the woods. "Sorry," Justin said and held out the journal, and as he did so, a photograph of a young boy fell out. The man reached down and picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then took the journal from Justin and placed the photo inside. "My son," the man said. He stepped toward us, and we moved out of the way as he placed the journal back onto the shelf, then knelt to pick up the rest of the books. "Sorry, sir," I said, and helped him pick up the books. Justin did the same, then the man took the books from us and returned them to their shelves. "What are your names?" the man asked. We introduced ourselves, and he told us his name was Henry, then asked, "Is this the first time you've seen my cabin?" "Yes, sir," we answered. "Nobody else knows about it?" Justin and I looked at each other, then back at Henry, and shrugged. "We ain't ever heard anyone mention it," Justin said. Henry looked at us a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Don't tell anyone." He walked over to a bucket of water he must have brought inside with him and dumped some of it into the pot that sat atop the stove. Then he stepped outside. "We should go," I whispered. "Okay," Justin answered. We hurried to the doorway, and right as we reached it, Henry was there holding a rifle and a log. He looked at us a moment, then we moved out of the way, so he could pass. He stepped through and leaned the rifle against the wall and placed the log into the stove. "I'm going to make rabbit stew," he said, and began to make a fire. "You're welcome to join." "We need to get back home," I said. Justin hesitated, though, and asked, "Why you out here?" With the fire going, the man shut the hatch, and stood and faced us. "Because I want to be." "Are you alone?" The man nodded. "What about your son?" I asked. The man looked at me, then his eyes fell to his feet, and he said, "He's dead." "Oh. Sorry. How'd he die?" Justin asked. The man looked back up. "He was sick." "Where's his mom?" The man shrugged. "I don't know. We aren't together anymore." The water was beginning to boil. The man turned to it and began putting in different herbs and spices. "Will one of you grab the rabbit from the stump outside?" he asked. Justin stepped outside and Henry glanced over at me, and said, "Go grab some vegetables from the garden out back." "Which ones?" "Whichever ones you like." Justin and I met on my way to the garden, and he said, "He doesn't seem so bad." "I don't know. What if he's some sort of outlaw?" Justin grinned. "Maybe he's a bank robber. Or a murderer." Justin held up the skinned rabbit. "This one might agree with you," then he laughed and headed into the cabin. At the garden, I hadn't the faintest idea what I was looking at. Everything looked like weeds, aside from the tomatoes and peppers. "So, that's what I grabbed." "Here you go," I said as I stepped back inside, and handed Henry the veggies. "No potatoes or carrots?" he asked. "I didn't see any. They're under the soil." "Oh." Henry smirked and took the tomatoes and peppers from me, and said, "Well, let's see how Cole's stew turns out." That evening, we sat around the cabin and ate the spiciest rabbit stew I'd ever had. For a second there, I'd even thought we'd been poisoned. But Henry just laughed and said I'd picked something called a habanero pepper. "What kind of psycho eats this stuff?" Justin said as he gulped down a second cup of water. "Sorry, boys," Henry laughed. "I should have warned you." He stood and grabbed another jar and said, "Try this. It might help cool you off." "What is it?" I asked. "Honey." I was desperate, so I quickly took the jar and stuck a spoonful in my mouth, and sure enough, it seemed to help. Justin snagged it from me and did the same, and before long, we'd cleaned out that entire jar of honey. "Look at y'all, a couple of Pooh Bears," Henry joked. "Sorry," I apologized. "I'll get you more." "I appreciate that, Cole." Henry stood and took our dishes from us. It's getting dark. You boys better head home. We agreed and thanked him for the honey, and I apologized for ruining the rabbit stew. Henry shrugged and said, I liked it. Might make more for myself sometime. That next morning, I was up in my room when I heard a commotion coming from across the street. Justin and his dad were shouting at each other, and shortly thereafter, Justin came storming outside. I quickly opened my window and hollered for him, and he looked up at me and said, Let's get the hell out of here, Cole. I put on my shoes and hurried down the stairs and past my mom and sister, who were sitting on the couch watching the morning show. Where you off to? Mom asked. Gonna go hang out with Justin. Be home before dark this time. I will. I mean it. Justin was waiting for me outside. We bumped fists, and he said, Let's go see what Henry's doing. Right now? You got anything better to do? I shrugged. No, I guess not. Hold on a second. I hurried back inside and into the kitchen and grabbed one of those bottles of honey that's shaped like a bear, then ran out the door again as my mom said, Hey, were you taking my honey? I looked at Justin and yelled, Run, and we took off for the woods. As we walked through the woods, Justin went on about what an asshole his dad was and how life would be better if it were just him and his mom. I wasn't so sure if it would be better or just another kind of awful, considering his mom was a useless alcoholic. But, at least she didn't hit him. She wasn't always a drunk, you know. Justin said. That's why I wear this necklace. It was a shark tooth necklace I'd never seen Justin without for as long as I knew him. Nothing impressive. You can find one in any beach gift shop. They weren't together for a while, my mom and dad, Justin continued. They'd broken up. Before you knew me. Mom and I were happy back then. We went to the beach one day, and she bought me this. We couldn't afford much, you know. But we didn't need much. Or at least I didn't think so. Why'd they get back together? Mom thought we needed more, and Dad could afford it. He's the only reason we're in that house. I guess that ain't all bad. We wouldn't be friends if you weren't in that house. Justin smiled and patted me on the back. You're right, Cole. But never knowing someone is okay. Losing someone you knew is what's hard. Henry was sitting in the doorway reading a book when we arrived. Back so soon. Brought you some honey, I said. Henry held out his hand and I tossed it to him. He looked at it and smiled. Thank you, Cole. What you readin'? Justin asked. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Ever heard of it? Justin shook his head. I'm not much of a reader. Henry looked at me and I shook my head as well. What's it about? I asked. It's about two friends, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. They get into a bunch of trouble and go on adventures and such. It's sort of a kid's book. Henry closed the book. I started reading it again because you two remind me of the main characters. Cole, you're like Tom, and Justin here is like Huckleberry. What kind of name is Huckleberry? Justin asked. Henry shrugged. Same could be said about Justin, or Cole, or even Henry. What kind of name is any name, really? We hadn't a clue, and noticing he'd confused us, Henry laughed and said, So, what can I do for you boys today? I guess we're just looking for something to do. Henry put the book down and scratched at his chin. Y'all know how to chop logs? On that day, Henry taught us how to chop logs and start a fire, and over the next couple of years we'd sneak off a few days each week and bring Henry food and supplies in exchange for lessons in self-sufficiency. He taught us things like how to work with wood, garden, hunt, skin an animal, and cook. We'd also check out books for him from the library, and when he finished one we'd spend the following night sitting fireside as he told us all about what he'd read. Henry became like a father to Justin and me, and that made me and Justin feel more like brothers. Justin was 16 when he told me his plan. I want to introduce Henry to my mom. What? Why? I asked. Maybe they'll hit it off. But your parents are still married. I know. I'm hoping if mom meets Henry, she'll fall in love with him and leave my dad. You don't even know if Henry is her type. How can he not be? He's single and nice and way better than my dad. That don't mean she'll fall in love with him. It don't work that way, Justin. You even said that the only reason your mom got back together with your dad is because he had money. Henry doesn't have any money. Justin thumbed at the shark tooth necklace. Henry can show her that we don't need money to be happy. He can help her remember. Part of me didn't want it to happen because I wanted Henry to be my dad. I would have been jealous. But, I also knew that Henry wasn't just living in the woods. He was hiding. For whatever reason, he didn't want to be found. That night there was an argument across the street. It was violent and it was loud. Glass was shattered and doors were slammed, and in the morning, Justin was gone. I'd gotten used to hearing from Justin every day. If I didn't see him, he'd call me over the walkie-talkie. This was the 90s. We weren't using cell phones. So, I went to his house that following afternoon and knocked on the door. Something I was always hesitant to do. His dad answered and just looked at me. Is Justin home? I asked. No. I haven't seen him all day. His dad shrugged. Not my problem. But he's your son. Excuse me. I swallowed and said, sorry, I meant that you'd know better than anyone else. Well, I don't. Before he shut the door, I noticed that the rug that was usually spread across the living room floor was gone, and there was a new hole in the wall about the size of a fist. That had me concerned, but I decided I'd check with Henry before telling my mom what I saw. So, I made the long walk through the woods alone to Henry's house. White smoke was billowing from the chimney as I arrived and knocked on the door. Henry opened it and said, "Hey, Cole. Come on in." I stepped inside and could smell that he was cooking a stew. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you're probably not going to want any of this stew," he said. "How come?" He lifted the pot off the stove and showed me. "It's your spicy rabbit concoction." I smirked. "No thanks." "Well, if you change your mind, I have plenty of honey." Henry went back to stirring. "Where's Justin?" I was hoping he was here. Henry stopped stirring and looked at me. "You can't find him?" "No. I haven't seen him all day." "That's not like him." "No, it ain't. But I heard his dad hollerin' last night, and when I went to his house a couple hours ago, there was a big hole in the wall and the living room rug was missing. And his dad said he ain't seen him all day." Henry sighed and sat on the bed. "Have you told your mom?" "Not yet. I wanted to see if he was here first." "Can you think of anywhere else he might be?" I shrugged. "No. He was planning on coming out here anyway." "Without you?" "I don't know. Maybe. He wanted to try to get you to meet his mom." Henry furrowed his brow. "Why?" "He thought if she met you, she might fall in love and leave his dad." Henry smirked and shook his head. "Oh, Justin. That poor boy." I watched Henry for a moment, then asked, "Would you have married his mom?" "No, Cole. I don't know her, and even if I did, my marrying days are over. This is how I'm going to live until I die. Alone." Henry nodded. "What do I do now?" Henry stood up and took the pot off the stove, set it onto a cinder block, and tasted the stew. "If you tell the police and Justin becomes a missing person, there will be search parties looking all up and down these woods. They'll find me. So, finding Justin is more important. I'm a wanted man, Cole." It was the first time I'd heard him admit it. He truly was an outlaw. What did you do? I asked. Henry put the spoon down and walked over to the bookshelf, pulled out his journal and removed the picture of the young boy and looked at it. His name was Sean. Your son. I lied when I told you he was sick. He wasn't sick. He was murdered. A man took him when he was walking home from school. He took my son, locked him in a cellar, and tortured him until he died. Sean was only 10 years old. I'm sorry, Henry. I knew who did it, but the police thought differently. They said there wasn't enough evidence. But I knew without a shadow of a doubt, it was him. So, I did what the police couldn't. I killed him. Henry turned and looked at me. And, for that reason, I can't let them find me. I was shocked that Henry was even capable of such a thing. Okay. Then what do I do? Henry placed the photograph on the bookshelf and sat back on the bed. You need to either find Justin or find proof that his dad killed him. But you need to move quick, before someone files a missing person report. Justin's dad owned a contracting business. Some days he worked long hours, some days he barely worked at all. It was impossible to gauge when he would and wouldn't be home. So, the following morning I watched by my window until he left, and the second he did, I hurried across the street. The door was locked, as I figured it would be, but I knew the same couldn't be said about Justin's bedroom window. There'd been plenty of times when Justin snuck out that window in the middle of the night and, likewise, I'd also snuck in a handful of times. The latch was broken. It was easy. I entered as quiet and careful as I could, and looked around Justin's room for any clues. It was messier than I remembered, and the door had been knocked off its hinges. But what stood out most to me was that his mattress was missing. Nothing else seemed out of place. I stepped into the hall and crept carefully toward the living room, keeping an eye out for Justin's mom as I went. The first thing I noticed was that the walls had more than one hole punched into them and the furniture was all scattered about. It looked like Justin's dad had gotten into a fistfight with the room itself. Again, I noticed the missing rug, and knelt and smelled something like bleach, and as I looked even closer, saw what looked like 3 drops of blood. All the clues were pointing to the worst. I crept over to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Lots of beer. I closed it and looked at the counters. There was a knife missing from the wooden knife block. I was almost certain now, but I had to check 2 more spots, the garage and the master bedroom. The garage had a freezer, and my heart trembled at the thought of what I might find in it. First, I looked around behind tool chests and whatnot, and finding nothing, I walked over to the freezer. Please don't be in here, I whispered to myself, then lifted the lid. There wasn't anything inside but deer meat and ice cream. I sighed with relief. Then, all of a sudden, the garage door began to open. Without a second thought, I hurried back into the house and didn't get far before I was face to face with Justin's mom. She blinked at me a few times, then groggily said, "Hey, Cole. Where's Justin?" At that moment, the interior garage door opened and Justin's dad stepped inside. "What the hell are you doing here?" he said. "I'm looking for Justin. He's not here." "I told you that already." "Where is he?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." His dad's eyes got big, and he said, "What are you trying to say?" "You killed him." "I know you did." "Boy, you better watch your mouth." "What's he talking about, Chris?" Justin's mom asked. "Shut the fuck up, woman." I backed up toward Justin's mom and said, "He killed Justin. And if you don't leave here, he's going to kill you, too." Chris pointed his finger at me and stepped closer. "I'll kill you, boy. That's who I'll kill if you don't get out of my house right now." Chris charged at me and Justin's mom pushed me out of the way and screamed, "Get out of here, Cole." Then she pulled at Chris long enough for me to run out the front door, and whether that was enough, I don't know, because I just kept running without looking back until I reached the woods, and even then, I still hurried until I got to Henry's cabin. I didn't bother to knock on the door this time. And when I got inside, Henry wasn't there. It was quiet and everything was tidy. I sat on the bed and caught my breath, and noticed that the rifle was gone. He must have been out hunting. I sat there a moment, waiting for him, and noticed the photograph of his son still sitting on the bookshelf from the previous night. It seemed dear to him, not something he liked to share. But, I was curious, so I picked it up and got my first real look at the boy. He looked to be about 10, the age Henry said he was when he died. He didn't look much like Henry. He was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, whereas Henry had dark features. There was something about his smile that seemed forced. His eyes didn't look happy. In fact, he looked kind of scared. But, there was something else. Something in the background that was out of place. It was Henry's cabin. That didn't make sense. Henry moved to the woods to escape the law, a law he didn't break until after his son died. How could his son have been here? I dropped the picture and pulled Henry's journal from the shelf and opened it. It wasn't a journal at all. It was a photo album. Each page a photo of a different child. I felt the room start to spin. I had to leave before he came back. I turned around to go out the door and stopped. There he was, standing right in front of me. "Hi, Cole," he said. He looked at the book in my hand. "I see you looked at my journal." I didn't look at it. "No." "Oh, well, then let me show you." "That's okay. I've gotta go." "Nonsense." Henry shut the door. "Stay a little while." Then he tapped the bed with the butt of his rifle and said, "Have a seat." Reluctantly, I set the book down and did as he asked. He stepped over to the bookshelf and picked up his journal, then sat next to me on the bed. He carefully opened it to the first page. "This is my collection, Cole. They're in ascending order by age. Page 1, you can see, is an infant. Little baby Andy. Page 2 is 1-year-old Tessa." He flipped the page. 2-year-old Abigail, or Abby, as her parents liked to call her. "Please, I don't want to see any more." Henry sighed and flipped a few pages to age 9, and next to it was a blank space. He placed the photo of the blonde-haired boy under age 10. Michael had gotten lost in the woods. He found me. Just like you and Justin. "Where is he?" "Justin? Oh, let me show you." Henry flipped past ages 11 through 15 and stopped on 16. It was a picture of Justin bound to a chair in a dark room. He was a fighter, I have to admit. I felt sick. Tears started to swell in my eyes. Justin had been betrayed by the man he trusted most, and at that moment I had not only lost my best friend, my brother, but I'd also lost another father. Now, Cole. Don't cry. I'll let you see him. You can say goodbye. He's alive. Henry pointed at the floor. He's down there. Show me. Henry closed the book and stood, then lifted the deerskin rug, revealing a hatch door. He opened it and a rotten odor lifted into the cabin. He motioned with his hand to the dark hole in the floor and said, "After you." I stood and looked down into the hole. I don't see anything. Henry reached under his bed and grabbed a flashlight and handed it to me. I shined it down the hole and could see a ladder descending about 20 feet to a dirt floor. "You go first," I said. Henry frowned. "Cole, whether you go down or not, I'm the one controlling this situation. I choose whether you live or die." I stared at him a moment, knowing what he said was true, and leaned over the hole and yelled, "Justin." No answer. Why isn't he answering? Henry shrugged. Maybe he can't hear you. I couldn't take not knowing any more, so I stepped to the ladder and descended. To my surprise, Henry followed. Justin, you in here? My feet touched the dirt floor and I looked around the room with the flashlight. It was empty of all except a chair in the middle, and slumped over in the chair was Justin. I hurried over to him and lifted his head, and when I did, it fell back, and I could see that his throat had been cut, and the ground beneath him was sodden with blood. Sorry, Cole. I needed 16. He trusted you. And were those 2 years not some of his best? I looked at Justin's lifeless body, the shark tooth necklace, his symbol of hope, still hanging from his neck. Are you going to kill me next? Well, I already have a 14. Henry opened the journal and took out the picture and looked at it for a moment. Then he tore it in half and said, but it looks like I need a new one. He dropped the journal and rushed toward me, and right before he reached me, I yanked the necklace from Justin's neck and stabbed the shark tooth straight into Henry's eye. Fuck! He cried, covering his face, blood seeping between his fingers. I sprinted past him and up the ladder, and before I got to the top, he grabbed a hold of my ankle. I kicked several times and managed to connect with his bloodied face, knocking him to the ground. Then I heaved myself up from the hole, slammed the hatch shut and piled everything I could on top of it. I watched for a moment as he tried and failed to push through, then I grabbed his rifle and took off for my house. The cabin was so far back in the woods, that the police asked me to take them to it. My mom went with me, and around noon, we reached it. We stayed back as the police moved forward with guns drawn. But, as they entered the cabin, I could see that the hatch was now open. They never found Henry. He left behind everything except his journal. I recently went back to the old neighborhood. Most of the houses have been sitting empty for over 20 years. I suppose people weren't comfortable with the idea that Henry might still be in those woods. And, now that everyone is gone, nature has moved into all of their homes. All except for one. Justin's dad stayed. But, not his mom. On the day of Justin's funeral, I gave her a gift. A necklace. One which reminded her of a happier time. In the woods is a spot where the cabin once stood. In its place a cross memorializing where so many children lost their lives. Nobody knows for sure how many children died there. At least 6, as that's how many bodies were found buried in various spots around the cabin. Around the cross are several mementos placed there by loved ones, a toy car, a girl's hair ribbon, a teddy bear. But, on the day I visited, I found something that sent a chill down my spine. A copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Inside was a handwritten message, which read, "See you soon, 38. Tomorrow will be my 38th birthday." Fourth story. This story was shared by you/comprehensive N6058. I saw something terrifying while hiking in rural Appalachia. For context, I am a professional wilderness explorer. Since I was young, my passion had been geared towards the wilderness. I have hiked on rough terrain in many countries. I know the wilderness like it was my own precious child. I research what specific wildlife lives in the area before I go hiking, so I know what to be prepared for. That's what makes this ordeal even more terrifying. One day, while browsing through a travel site for West Virginia, I saw a pop-up for a specific mountain trail. Again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary while researching, and it really seemed like the ideal hiking spot, leading up to a beautiful view showing a gorgeous blue lake. When researching the trail, it was mentioned that the area was very isolated, with the nearest town being 123 miles away. It seemed very enticing. Of course, it had to normal flora and fauna of the region, and it didn't seem odd. It did mention not to disturb the wildlife and to watch where you step because of many false footholds. That would break away and cause you to fall down the cliffside. Overall, it's just the normal mountain trail. I spent about a month preparing for this trip. I made sure to contact everyone I knew so they would know where I was in case I went missing. I then drove there and started my hike. Once I got there, I relished at the beauty of it all. The start of the trail had a view of many peaks staring down at you, and I thought to myself how the view looked like giant gods, towering over the world. I then started on the trail. At first, everything was fine. It was your typical mountain trail. I made sure I took a break every 15 minutes or so I didn't overwork myself and have to call quits. It was around my 5th break that things started to seem off. The birds had stopped singing, and I couldn't hear the chattering of insects. I didn't even hear the wind blowing through the trees. It was as if everything had vanished. After about 5 minutes, I started on the hike again. I was a little nervous and on edge, though, because I was the loudest thing there. It felt wrong, as though I was being watched, stared down by some malevolent force, playing with me. I continued, until around break number 20. I stopped, getting out my bottle of water, as I had done multiple times before. But as I was putting the bottle to my lips, I realized something was off. I heard twigs snapping, about 10 feet behind me. I threw my water bottle down and turned around to see what I heard. I can't describe exactly what I saw. That is a bit too difficult. The creature I saw was vaguely humanoid, bipedal, with pale, paste-like skin. Its face, though, was certainly not. It had eyes that I can only describe as being too big to fit its face. Its face, though small, still surrounded the eyes, but I swear its eyes were too big. The creature's mouth was indescribable, but I think the closest I could use for you to picture it would be to say that it was somewhere in between a human and a dog mouth, with 5 layers of knife-like teeth. Its hands were freakishly large, about the size of my arm, with long skinny fingers to match. About the rest of it, I can't really describe. It was a sort of blur, almost hard to see. That's all I remember about its lower half. I stood still, staring at the thing. It hadn't noticed me yet, but it wouldn't be long before it did. It was then that I started to sneeze, and then the creature really noticed me. It turned its head around, but instead of attacking me, it spoke. "Onigie," it said, in a deep guttural voice. "I don't understand," I said, confused, startled by its speaking. It looked at me, pushed its head forward, as if to say, "Leave." I then started to run, leaving in fear. I made sure it didn't follow, and I ran till I got to my cat. I recently tried to do research, but I haven't found anything on it. But what I do know is that it spoke in Cherokee. It told me to leave. I have researched the region and have seen that many people have come up missing there. I now think about the human-like sorrow in that creature's eyes, and I think I know why it wanted me to leave. 5th story. This story was shared by you/Phoenix_flies. I witnessed a horrific ritual in the woods. A stone circle sits in the ancient oak woods behind my house. A dozen large rocks, positioned in a pattern that could be no accident. One is carved into a sort of throne. One sits upon 2 others to form an arch, echoing the formations at Stonehenge, a mere hour's drive away. I used to play there with my older brother, until he was tragically taken from us. Perhaps too young to fully comprehend his loss, I returned to the stone circle daily, playing with my imaginary friend in his stead. Doghead was the name I gave him, inspired by a rather obvious feature my young imagination had conjured up. In my mind's eye, he had the energy and affection of a puppy, and he was as close a companion as a lonely young boy could ever hope for. We used to play for hours, safe in the knowledge that home was the only house for miles. My parents were distant and self-absorbed throughout my childhood, and the loss of their eldest son, their golden boy, only turned them colder. They were whisked away to join him by a devastating car accident when I was 19. The house, the surrounding land, and the stone circle in the woods, it was suddenly all mine. It was finally as empty as it had always felt. Those first few years were strange. I had been relatively self-sufficient for as long as I could remember, so my day-to-day life changed little after they died. I worked the same job, writing copy for websites and magazines from home. I ate the same food, groceries delivered weekly. It took a long time to get used to living without their influence, without their perpetual misery. As time went by, I became more comfortable in my own skin. I left behind the cowering, appeasing child. I shrugged off the expectations and the aura of constant disappointment. I started learning who I was, and I grew to like it. And I forgot about the stone circle in the woods behind the house. The forest itself is sparse. Each wizened oak tree stands at a respectful distance from the others, as if honoring some ancient acorn pact. Their high canopies dominate the sky, permitting precious little sunlight to filter through their leaves. Below, the prime soil was claimed by their web of roots long ago, leaving few resources for competing flora. The only bushes daring enough to challenge the monopoly of these giants are holly and gorse, their sharp leaves offering refuge to songbirds and scavengers alike. Sparse though these woods are, they are far from lifeless. At night, however, the woods don a deathly disguise. Save for the eerie breeze shuffle of the leafy canopy, an unnatural stillness hangs between the trunks like a thick fog. The distance between each oak lends a feeling of being exposed to all directions, carrying light further than might be expected, which is how I was first enticed by the glimmers I saw from my bathroom window. Half asleep and wishing to be fully so, I had neglected to turn on the bathroom light. If I had so much as flipped that switch, the subtle flickering outside would have gone unnoticed, the horrors of the night now seared into my mind would have gone without witness, and I would soon have fallen asleep safe and untroubled. Instead, I slapped myself awake and threw together a dark outfit, pocketing a torch. In an instant I was 12 years old again, preparing for an imaginary stealth mission, sneaking out under the cover of darkness, taking care not to step on even a single twig, partly in commitment to the scene, and partly from fear of the retribution from my parents should I be caught. Both then and now, the fear mixed with excitement to produce the most irresistible cocktail, and I crept into the woods without hesitation. I advanced steadily as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. Every step was measured, every motion a calculated risk. Roots could be trip hazards. The snap of dry branches could give me away. A dirt hole from badger or fox habitation could spell a sprained ankle or worse. I kept my breathing deep and steady, preparing to run at a moment's notice. Peering around trunks as I pressed into the woods, I followed the light while keeping to the shadows. As it drew me on, I realized it must originate from more than a single source. I pictured a forest fire, but there was no smell of smoke, no crackle of caught bark. A bizarre sound made me stop dead, pressing my back against the nearest tree. It was deep, guttural, and reminded me of videos I'd seen of Mongolian throat singing. The low vocal rumble rolled through the forest, several voices combined into a loud and stirring chord which I felt take a firm hold of my ribcage. As suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I listened intently for any other sound and could faintly hear a single voice, monotone and slow, but I couldn't make out the syllables. I peeked cautiously around the oak, and began deeper into the woods. It wasn't long until I saw the source of the light, dozens and dozens of blazing torches, easily 100 or more, each mounted on a stake driven into the ground at an angle, the flames directed outwards as if to ward off the forest itself. The torches formed a wide circle in a clearing, within which stood a host of robed figures, heads lowered. Each crimson robe was uniformly embellished with gold borders and detailing, mirroring the flames that danced around them. I saw the torches first, then the people. Then I saw the stones, and my breath caught in my throat. The gathering had taken place on the ancient playground of my youth, within the stone circle I had long since forgotten. Far from respectful occupiers, however, 4 of these cloaked intruders were painting symbols and sigils onto the bare, pure rocks, a bucket of red in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. A network of circles, curves and crossed lines already adorned most of the rocks. They were nearly finished with their task. I watched them corrupting my childhood one brush stroke at a time, and fought hard not to yell. This felt like both a deeply personal attack and a sacrilegious transgression all at once. I wept in silence as I watched them complete their work. I was struck by a vivid memory of my brother sat in the chair carved stone, bending to tap a stick onto each of my shoulders in turn. He was king that day, and I was being knighted to protect the realm. For hours, he would point out imaginary invaders and threats to the kingdom, all trying to break into the sacred space of the stone circle, and I would charge into battle, bellowing as best a boy of 7 could, swinging a branch to fend off foes on all sides. I chided my childish stupidity. When outnumbered, as I was last night, self-preservation comes first. Bravado without caution would be suicide. One of these interlopers was standing on my brother's throne, arms outstretched, addressing the others like a priest leading a congregation. His was the voice I had heard, though too quiet to discern from where I stood. I had to get closer. The group was focused on his speech, I reasoned, and any subtle motion I made in the shadows of the forest would likely be lost among the flickering torches. Light on my feet, I pressed even closer, crouching to take cover beneath the spikes of a holly bush with an oak to my side. I was mere feet from the edge of the clearing, but confident in my concealed position. No further, I told myself, either remain, or retreat. I was close enough to hear the speech, but its meaning was lost to me. It clearly wasn't English, but sounded like no language I had ever heard. There was a guttural, stern tone to it, almost Germanic, but the syllables weren't recognizably German either. Percussive sounds punctuated the phrases, sometimes a click, sometimes a hacking noise like the speaker was clearing his throat. The structure of the speech was alien to me, and although I couldn't hope to comprehend its meaning, I was enraptured. It felt as if he was speaking from beyond himself, from somewhere far older than any tongues remembered or recorded, channeling verses written before writing. The crowd was similarly captivated, hanging from his every utterance. All except the 4 painters, and one man in the middle. This man, I saw, was unrobed. Rather, he was naked and kneeling, his wrists bound behind his back, eyes wide with impassioned pleading as the priest figure continued. His head was shaking back and forth, as if to deny every utterance of the speech. The scene put me in mind of a trial, perhaps for some pagan or shamanic cult. I know little of such beliefs and values, having led such an insular life, so I had no real frame of reference, but the whole display felt sinister and sickened me. It came again, the sound which had shocked me earlier, that low, rumbling chord, now revealed to originate from the throats of the entire congregation acting as one, triggered by something the throned figure had said. He sliced a hand through the air and the tone ceased immediately. Another hand gesture and it began afresh, a slice and it stopped. This on and off routine repeated, its conductor picking up the pace steadily from labored to frenzied. The bound man was clearly terrified, his pleading eyes darting from figure to figure, each swept up in this guttural chanting crescendo. Dark red streaks painted his face, from his eyes down to his chin. With a final swipe of the priest's arm, the group fell silent. A beckon of his hand, and 2 of the hooded flock hauled the bound man to his feet, dragging him towards the stone chair. I could hear him straining and groaning through closed lips. As he was brought before the priest, I saw his mouth had been sewn shut with a tight web of cord, his lips turned inwards. Those red tear streaks he wore were colored by dried blood, his wide eyes unable to close without their lids. This group, or cult, had taken morbid steps to prevent him from screaming or looking away. The leader of the ceremony drew a short dagger, holding it skywards, flames glinting off the blade. The man protested as best he could, but was flanked and held in place by taller, stronger figures. In 2 quick motions an X was traced across his bare chest, the wounds shallow and scarlet bright. The crowd shifted suddenly at this, surging towards the throne. Hands were all over the man in an instant, carrying him back and away, ignoring his feeble writhing and muffled screams. A divide had formed in the clearing, bisecting the stone circle. On one side, the cult, some of whom had picked up torches and were brandishing them. On the other side, the man, kicked to the floor and struggling to stand with his hands still bound. Flames were turned on him, keeping him at bay from the group. Behind him, the stone archway loomed, a gateway to the gloom of the woods. A gap had been deliberately left in the circle of torchlight. The leader bellowed out a 3-syllable chant in that strange language, which was eagerly echoed back by his flock. He repeated the phrase, louder, rousing the crowd. This back-and-forth exchange continued, building in volume and speed towards a raw cacophony. When there was scarce a pause between call and response, the priest handed the reins to chaos, the clamor of the crowd drowning the forest in a tide of sound. Feet were stomping, arms were waved. Frenzied dances broke out. One member of the congregation passed out. They were unceremoniously rolled to the side of the circle and abandoned in favor of the growing noise. I lay flat under the holly bush with my hands clamped over my ears, such was the sheer volume before me. As painful as the sound was to bear, I couldn't help but find their primal passion compelling. I should have left them to their devices. I should have made a break for home while they were so deeply distracted. They stopped, as one, falling completely silent. The sense of euphoric elation had collapsed, giving way to a nervous foreboding. Heads turned anxiously from side to side. The group huddled, gathering in closer towards the stone chair. The bound man was making his way towards them on his knees, straining to force pleas through stitched lips, but was kept back by the torchbearers. They seemed intent on pushing him towards the archway, towards the looming dark of the forest. Someone in the crowd noticed something in the forest behind the bound man, pointing a finger beyond the circle, past the stone arch, into the tree-line. Their extended arm was quickly pulled down by other hands, as if chided by the group. Regardless, a tangible excitement overtook the gathering. Murmurs broke out, whispers and gasps. They pressed back, even further away from the bound man and the stone archway behind him. I strained my eyes to see beyond the flames, seeing nothing but shifting shadows. As I looked back to the crowd, however, I saw it. A tall figure emerged from the trees, its outline only clear from the corner of my eyes as they struggled to adjust to the dark. It appeared as though the shadow of a tree had come to life, standing at least 8 or 9 feet tall. I couldn't see where its height ended. It swept stiffly towards the clearing as if carried by invisible ropes. There was no motion of walking, this giant shadow floated. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, where it should have been bathed in torchlight. Instead, it was a void, a vertical black hole, seeming to drain the light from the woods around it. As I tried to make sense of what I was witnessing, this floating shadow was passed by a second. They moved alternately. One stopped as the other advanced, carried in sweeping motions. As they drew nearer to the stone circle, the bound man turned his begging towards them, throwing himself down, his blood-stained face against the thin grass, his frame racked with wretched sobs. He was hoping, or praying, for mercy. None came. Without warning, his torso was wrapped in giant fingers of that same vacant darkness. He was snatched through the archway in barely a breath, out towards the tree-line, and lifted high over the stones. His legs kicked at the air, finding no purchase. As he was held aloft, I gleaned a sense of the scale of the creature before me. It was, I now saw, a single entity. What I had identified as 2 figures earlier were merely its shins. It stood on 2 legs, looming over the stone circle, one huge hand resting atop the archway. Light failed to adhere to its form, offering only a silhouette to interpret against the backdrop of torchlit oaks. It had moved in complete silence, despite its size. Though vast, it seemed to share the limbs and proportions of a human, with one notable exception. I felt my heart stop dead as I looked up into the canopy of leaves, and recognized the outline of a forgotten figure from my own past, looming over the stone circle in which we had played so long ago. I clamped my hands over my mouth to keep the shock within. I had grown a lot over the past 20 years, inside and out. It seemed that Doghead had grown even more. The cultists had by now dropped to their knees, every head bowed in silent reverence. A uniform stillness had come over them, likely born from both respect and fear, and they had good reason for the latter. The naked man, their sacrifice, was held aloft by Doghead with both hands, those massive pitch-black fingers clasped around his legs and his torso. He strained to scream as the creature tightened its grip and twisted. Something gave out with a crunch, his ribcage and pelvis rotating in different directions. Blood spewed from his mouth as his lips parted in spite of the stitches, bellowing his pain freely now through torn curtains of scarlet. As his body bent, his skin broke around his midriff, yellow fat parting to give way to a cascade of entrails. He was divided, his scream failing as his diaphragm dropped. Doghead was elated, raising the drooping organs above its head, opening its enormous jaws and directing the offal inside. Even while consuming its prey, no sound came from the shadow monster itself. The man was just barely clinging on to life, gasping breathlessly, his eyes darting around in panic as dark teeth the size of his forearm clamped down on what remained of his torso, gnawing like living jerky. Fighting to divert my gaze from this atrocity, I looked towards the lowered heads of the cult, and saw more shoulders shaking than still. They were deeply afraid, that much was clear. Even the throned figure who had led the ritual was kneeling on the stone seat, head bowed and trembling. A sudden gasp erupted from the crowd. The cultist who had passed out earlier had awoken and was looking around, bleary and sluggish. Some members of the group had noticed and were trying to encourage them to their knees, but they were resistant in their barely conscious state. Doghead dropped its snack, staring fiercely as this poor fool staggered to their feet. The creature's eyes were previously indistinguishable from the great canine shadow of its head, but now they shone a piercing white, small and blazing. This accidental indignity from the dazed cultist had changed something in Doghead. Swiftly but silently it swept an arm towards the ground, extinguishing a dozen of the protective torches around the stone circle with a single motion. There was a brief moment of profound quiet, as those gathered seemed to process what had just happened. The quenched torches breathed the last of their smoke. A second of foreboding stillness hung heavy in the night air, and then, pandemonium. The crowd fell about themselves, shrieking in terror, scrambling over one another in all directions, eschewing reverence for pure panic. Doghead didn't hesitate, lunging into the stone circle, no longer held back. It was absolutely silent in its motion, a flawless predator. It bounded towards the hapless transgressor and effortlessly snatched them from the ground. The staggering cultist hardly had chance to gasp before Doghead snapped their chin up and back with a single thumb, separating their skull from the rest of their spine without splitting the skin. Their body fell limp instantly and was dropped to the ground. My legs were aching to carry me away from the scene, but I knew I had to stay put. Not only would I be a target for the shadow monster, but potentially for the cultists. The worst wounds I would receive from my vantage point under the bush would be scrapes and bruises, so there I remained, quaking though I was. The ritual leader was the first to abandon the stone circle altogether, sprinting straight into the woods without looking back, not sparing a moment's thoughts for their flock. The others followed suit in a staggered wave, clearly caught between the protection they believed would hold firm and the vulnerable darkness of the forest. Having claimed 2 victims, Doghead turned its attention to the remaining flames. It lumbered around the edge of the stone circle, sweeping its palm over the torches. They went out without exception, either blown by displaced air through the motion of that huge hand, or perhaps smothered by the shadows that formed this creature. As the last of the lights disappeared, so too did Doghead, its void outline no longer visible against trees that once again stood dark and still. It had reclaimed its cover of night, its motion barely perceptible as the faintest suggestion through leaf-filtered starlight, and it sped away into the gloom. The cult had dispersed, their footfalls and shrieks gradually diminishing to nothing. The circle was silent once again, almost tranquil, save for the scrawled sigils on the stones. I lay still beneath the holly bush until dawn broke and beyond, making certain that no shadows remained to ambush me before I scrambled out to make my way home. In daylight, I could see that the remains of the 2 victims claimed by Doghead had disappeared in the hours since their slaughter. The creature had managed to remove them both, and I hadn't even noticed its presence. As I write this, I am profoundly conflicted, struck by a heady mix of abject terror and giddy revelation. I'm shaking, shocked to the core by what I witnessed. A monster he may be, but he was once my closest friend, one I thought lost to the passing years and the maturing mind. Before sundown, I will return to the circle and wash those stones clean. It feels disrespectful to leave them so sullied and stained. After all, for better or for worse, I am no longer alone. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/Ain Meg. The Night Watcher. I am a 28-year-old female, and this is an incident that happened to me last week. I live in a small town, small enough for the map to not even display it. I was always an insomniac and stayed awake till 4 in the morning. Every night at around 2 a.m., I could hear a rustling sound of footsteps in my backyard. Before getting any further, I would like to give an outline of my property. It's a long plot with half of the area covered with big trees and the front half has the building that we live in. Our house is a 3-story building and we have a large backyard. I would come home every summer from my university to spend my vacation with my family. I live with my parents and my younger sister. Every summer vacation, I come to stay for about a month and spend really quality time at home. The days are perfect, but the nights are miserable for me. Every night I would stay awake late and had awful experiences regarding the sounds I mentioned earlier. One day, I decided to confront whoever was making such noise at such late hours of night. I was a fool and decided not to wake my parents up. My room was just beside an open corridor that led straight to the backyard. I still remember it to be a Saturday night. As the clock struck 2, I could hear the rustling noise again. I slowly crept down my bed and opened the door. It made a slight noise and the rustling stopped. I took my phone with me and started walking with my flashlight on. I couldn't see anything at first. As I approached through the darkness, I could see a black figure crouching in the distance, hiding behind an oak tree. I was scared shitless at this point, but something in me told me to keep walking. My reaction was involuntary and I had no control over my body. I slowly approached the figure, which at this point had stood up and I could see its yellow glowing eyes. My phone had stopped working at this point, the battery had died out. Moon was the only source of light I could use to traverse my path. As I was inches away from the figure, it let out a shrieking noise and opened its mouth wide. My eyes had adjusted to the dark and I could see hundreds of razor-sharp teeth protruding from its face. The creature was about 8 feet tall, skinny and covered with a slimy substance all over its body. I was frozen with fear and couldn't move my feet. The creature slowly inched close towards me. It started to make a low growl and a weird hissing noise. It was only inches from my face at this point and I could smell its rotting breath. The creature said in a raspy voice, "Fresh flesh." I immediately came back to my senses, turned back and started running towards my room. It was fast and as I was about to enter my room, it blocked my way. "I am the Night Watcher," it rasped. I started sobbing at this point. "I want you," it said. I was petrified and just stood there motionless. The creature then jumped over me and bit a chunk from my hand. I was so scared that my voice had died out in my throat. It started to tear off flesh from my legs. I was deeply in pain and slowly, I fainted. I was awoken next morning by my mother. I saw around me and I could understand that I was laying in a hospital bed. The doctors said that I was attacked by an animal and that I had to stay there for about a week. My parents were standing beside me and my mother was in tears. My arms and legs were wrapped in bandages and I couldn't move, as I was in great pain. Today I am writing this post from the hospital. My scars are healing fast and my eyes are turning yellow. My skin is changing texture and has taken a greasy yellow form. The doctors think I have jaundice. I am afraid to go home and mostly afraid that I'm turning into the next Night Watcher. I hope this post finds someone who knows what I am going through and can help me reverse this transformation. Seventh story. This story was shared by you/Ilavimicat. Sinister beings in the Oklahoma forests. "I'm so excited to see Mom," my daughter exclaimed. "I know you are, honey. Come on now, get in the car. To give you all a little backstory, my name is Michael. My wife divorced me 2 years ago due to me having a crippling drug addiction. Over the course of these 2 years, I became a better person. I stopped taking drugs and hanging out with my old pals, all in the hopes that my wife will come back to me one day. That day never came. One day, I got a call from my ex saying that my daughter missed me and really wanted to see me. After all, you can't keep a child from seeing their own father. I drove 4 hours to Springfield to pick her up and went back home. She stayed with me for 2 weeks. We went to the arcade, the movies, her favorite restaurant, and I even bought her a few dolls here and there. Anyways, the 2 weeks pass by quickly, and it's time to take her back to her mother. You sure you got everything you need, sweetie? This'll be a long drive. Yes, Dad. Can we go now? Of course we can. I started my car and began driving. I lived in Oklahoma City, and my ex lived in Springfield, Missouri. It's a 4-hour-long drive that involves going through the Oklahoma Ancient Forest, which is where we encountered them. Hey Dad, look a. Buzz 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 buzz. Oh hey, your mother is calling. I picked up the phone and accepted the call. Hi. Hello, Michael. So how's Haley? Did she have fun? Yeah, she's alright. We went to movies, the arcade, I even bought her some new toys. Can I talk to her? Haley, here, your mother wants to talk to you. Hi sweetie, did you have F? Dad, watch out. Brakes squealing bang. Hello. Hello. Haley. Michael. We crashed the car, I passed out. The last thing I heard was my ex's worried voice over the phone. I woke up in my house, I was arguing with Samantha. Please Michael. Please. Go to rehab Michael. You have to stop, please. You have to stop for the sake of our little Haley. Please listen to me. I can't. I tried. Then I can't be with you, Michael, I want a divorce. No Samantha, baby, please. I'm trying. Dad. Dad. Dad, wake up. Dad. What happened? We crashed into an elk, Dad. Oh my God. Oh God. Haley. Haley, are you hurt, sweetie? Only a little. Is the elk still alive? Yes, Dad. I think it's hurt. I grabbed my pistol out of the glove box and got out of the car. I saw the elk, covered in blood and barely breathing. Poor thing. Oh, you poor, dumb animal. Haley, close your eyes. Bang. Dad. Why did you shoot it? To put it out of its misery. I moved the elk out of the road and got back in the car. I pressed the gas pedal, but the car didn't move. You gotta be kidding me. I went out of the car and popped the hood open. The engine seemed okay. As I was opening the car door, I heard tree branches rustling and something rapidly approaching me. Fearing for the worst, I turned around and aimed my pistol in the direction of the sound with my finger on the trigger. Suddenly, the noise stopped. I sighed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was just a wild animal. Amidst all the chaos, I didn't seem to notice that Haley didn't make a noise. As all that happened, I turned around to find a broken windshield, and Haley nowhere to be found. Haley. Haley, where are you, sweetie? Haley. I took a flashlight and an extra round of ammunition out of the glove box. I put the magazine in my pocket, turned on the flashlight, and began frantically looking for my daughter. Eventually, I saw the beam from my flashlight hit something. Haley. I said in a distraught voice. Haley, is that you? I got no response. I decided to keep on walking to whatever the thing was until its appearance became more clear as I approached. It was a girl all right, but not Haley. She looked much older, maybe 15 or 16. She was wearing a dirty white hospital gown, and her flesh seemed to be rotting. When I got close enough to clearly see the side of her head, I knew that there was no way in hell that thing was human. I slowly turned around and tried to walk back, but it was too late. It let out an ear-piercing demonic screech that I cannot describe. As I heard it rapidly approaching me, I knew that running was no good. I aimed my gun and fired half the mag at it until it finally collapsed. Thoughts started rushing through my brain. Did these things take Haley? What if they killed her? She's probably shivering out of fear right now. As my brain was processing what just happened, I heard a loud scream coming from the forest. Aha! Haley! Oh my God, that's Haley! I ran as fast as I could in that direction. I ignored the pentagrams and Wendigo skulls hung up on the trees and kept on running towards the direction of the noise, pistol in hand. Suddenly, the fog cleared, the light of the midnight moon shined through the forest. The joy I felt was soon replaced by dread as I saw strange beings around me. There were at least 5 of them. One seemed to look like a Wendigo, the other had the body of a horse and the torso of a human. The only thing I could say about the third one was that he had a tall, slender humanoid body, wore a maroon hoodie with a black cape and carried a strange object in his hand. The fourth one was a fat humanoid figure. In his hand was a rotting, half-eaten corpse of a cat. The fifth one was an old woman. She was tall. Very tall, she wore a black dress and had black paint under her eyes. As I stood in the middle of those creatures, I knew I was hopeless. There's no way the 10 bullets I had left would take out those hideous things. I blinked and saw them all standing not 5 inches away from me. I started shivering, thinking about how gruesome my death will be. They all started chanting something in some sort of language I could not describe. I felt hopeless until the old woman raised her hand, and I saw Haley. Haley! Dad? Dad, help! Let us go. What do you want from us? Why are you doing this to us? Let us go. The old woman grabbed Haley and gave her to the fat one. I saw my daughter screaming her lungs out as the thing bit off her limbs one by one. No. Leave her alone. Haley. It sounded like the woman was laughing. Eventually, my daughter's corpse was dropped right in front of me. So you killed her, now kill me. Kill me. Kill me too. They started to walk away. This was sent to me by an anonymous Reddit user on the 17th of May. I was scrolling through Reddit, not a day later, when I found a post saying the dead body of a man was found in the Oklahoma ancient forest. His death was determined to be suicide via gunshot to the head. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.